All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us today. My name is Jacob Ibarra. I'm a student at BYU-Idaho. We're all students here. We're in Brother Deal's 410 immunology class, and we're going to be talking about COVID-19 today. And so we're super psyched that you guys can tune in and listen to us. And I'll let the guys introduce themselves really quick.
So I'm Colton Barney. I'm from Rexburg, Idaho. And I'm kind of the guest star here because I actually have COVID right now. No, that wasn't planned. I have a little bit to present during this, but just so happened that I have COVID when we're presenting on the COVID vaccine.
I'm Devin Gopinath. I am a junior here at BYU-Idaho. And my topic was the inactive ingredient side effects, the long-term side effects.
I'm Ryan Burnham, senior up here at BYU-Idaho, and I'll be addressing the effects of the COVID vaccine on reproductive health.
I'm Christopher Jorgensen, and I'll be addressing the potential autoimmune effects caused by vaccines and the COVID vaccine.
Okay, sweet. So yeah, this is the dream team we got here for you guys. Just a bunch of undergrads, so it'll be good. And honestly, just so you guys know, we're going to be quoting a lot of stuff, and that'll be in our bibliography. We'll have that linked. So if you guys have any questions about that, please feel free to refer to that, and we'll be just touching up about that. And then let me just go over, the way we're setting this up. So I'll be talking about genetic editing and mRNA vaccines. Christopher will be talking about the history of autoimmunity caused by vaccines. We'll have Ryan talking about the effect of vaccine on reproductive health. Colton will be talking about actual side effects the past 2 months in this time frame. And Devin, like he said, he's going to be wrapping us up and talking about potential long-term side effects or side effects of inactive ingredients. So, like I said, let's enjoy the show, and we're going to be starting off good with some genetic editing. So, just to kind of go into my stuff, the question that I'd like to start off with is really, what is genetic editing? This is really fascinating stuff, and honestly, it's super prevalent to our time and age. We see that genome editing is where DNA is inserted, deleted, modified, or even replaced in a living organism. And this has proven to be a wonderful tool in our modern day and age, and with hopes to cure several types of cancers, treating sickle cell anemia, Alzheimer's. There's so much going on and so many ideas going on with this tool, genetic editing. On the flip side, we could see some scary things. One that comes to the top of my head is the genome editing of the prevention of HIV. A couple of years back in the People's Republic of China, we saw that a scientist was able to genetically alter a pair of twins so that they won't be affected with HIV. And as cool as this is, this does bring a whole slew of ethical questions and concerns, like, is this ethical and fair to the children? Can we better the human race in general, and how would that work? So some of the concerns, I guess, of the COVID-19 vaccine is, could it be considered genetic editing? And this is something that I'm going to be addressing for the next few minutes, and something that I believe to be truly fascinating stuff. So the COVID-19 vaccine has the connotation that it could be some kind of genetic editing. People have been scared that it could produce maybe some scary side effects in the future. I don't know, zombies or whatever it is. A lot of conspiracies out there. And from what I understand, this is believed to come from this new technology that we're not really used to, and it's mRNA vaccines. So I want to talk about how an mRNA vaccine works and how it's a relatively safe form of virus prevention. And in its most simplistic form, an mRNA vaccine works by introducing a blueprint for part of the virus. In the COVID, we're introducing a spike. So our body takes this blueprint and presents it to a protein factory called the ribosomes. And the mRNA that is translated for our DNA, that is mRNA that is translated for our DNA that is communicated within the cell to make proteins. That's what the blueprint is. Then after making this part of the virus, our body learns how to fight the virus in the future. So we're essentially training our body to encounter this virus and then produce defense or antibodies to prevent the virus from being able to thrive in our body. So really cool stuff. And the overall effect of this kind of vaccine does not produce any kind of infectious problems to our DNA. Like I said, this RNA that is getting presented, or this blueprint, it's not getting incorporated into our cells. It's just getting incorporated into the protein factory or the ribosomes. If it did get incorporated into the DNA, then we could be running into some problems. But since that's not the case, it shouldn't be a big concern for us. And first of all, for my studies, I was able to find out that mRNA vaccine is pretty safe. There are some concerns in regards with the reaction for our immune system. There has been evidence that the mRNA can cause a type of interferon response or activation of the immune system. This was a study done by Nature magazine. And if the immune system is provoked unnecessarily or triggered, that could cause some issues to really occur. But that didn't seem to be a big concern in this paper and wasn't very prevalent among other mRNA virus or vaccines. And
So Jacob, I have a question. So it's pretty much what you're saying is that we don't have to worry about World War Z happening from the mRNA vaccine, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, exactly. Like it's not going to be incorporated into our DNA.
All right.
And I want to talk a little bit about zombies and, I Am Legend and stuff, because I feel like what's interesting is just from the response of our society and stuff, I think we kind of get that fear. You know what I mean? Where we're just a bit concerned that this coding or introducing this vaccine could cause that. And so it is interesting. But as I said, and it's what was found in the CDC as well, it's stated that this mRNA vaccine, it's not injected into the coating of our cells, but like I've said before, it's introduced to the factory of our proteins, not our DNA. And so, but interestingly enough, Colt, now that you bring this up, there is a vaccine out there, the adenovirus or the Oxford vaccine, which is actually genetically more engineered than the other forms of the vaccine. And this vaccine, it is genetically engineered, but it's taken the proper precautions to not cause damage to our DNA, which is pretty cool because you have viruses, they need to reproduce and they create genes, or they have genes in them that get incorporated into our DNA that produce deadly effects. And they turn those genes off. They turned off this replication. So it's almost like a dud that gets incorporated into our DNA, our DNA. But, as we see, that's not a very common form of the vaccine. So, but it is something to know that one really, I guess you could say, is genetically editing our genome. Mm-hmm. But just to kind of wrap up what I was saying, just kind of going back, this mutation, oftentimes I think people get this connotation or this idea that introducing a vaccine could lead to a mutation. And there is some science that backs that up, because RNA, that is more easily mutated than DNA. But like was stated earlier, RNA is like the coding for proteins. And so it doesn't get incorporated into our DNA genome, but there are viruses that are built by specifically RNA. And that's where we see a lot of mutations. But like we stated, it is not like an RNA virus that's being incorporated. It's just like the blueprint or the way that a protein's being built. So moral of the story, we're not going to be making World War Z or zombies or I Am Legend, like that stuff's not happening. But we do see that it is, it's not really necessarily genome editing. It's more of like an introduction, or like it's showing us how to code for certain things.
Yeah. Jacob, I actually heard one person was telling me that the reason that they don't want to get the vaccine is because they're worried it's going to turn our cells into 5G tower receptors. And, I was like, that sounds like some pretty serious gene editing, but I wouldn't be too upset about that because, I drop calls all the time, and I'd love it if I had better cell phone reception. So,
yeah,
I mean,
can we add some Wi-Fi routers in there as well?
Yeah, that'd be great. Wouldn't get kicked out of my tests so often.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, cool. Well, that's all I have to say, at least for my part, guys. I guess we'll have Christopher take the lead.
Thanks, Jacob. That's awesome information. So this is another concern that vaccine hesitant individuals might have regarding the vaccine and illnesses that could be caused by it. Maybe not turning into a zombie, but one potential concern that people might have is the potential for autoimmune diseases to occur because of receiving the vaccine. To address the validity of this concern, I'm going to talk about how this concern isn't new just for the COVID vaccine. It's been a concern that people have had for a long time with all the other vaccinations that we've received. But first, what is an autoimmune disease? An autoimmune disease occurs because the body's natural defenses or the immune system attack the body's own healthy tissue. This results in many different effects on the body, which depends on the type of autoimmune disease that it is. According to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, it is known that Campylobacter, which is a bacterial infection in the intestines, can cause Guillain-Barré syndrome. The influenza virus can worsen symptoms of multiple sclerosis, or better known as MS. The Coxsackie virus can cause diabetes. So all of these diseases that naturally infect us can cause these autoimmune diseases. So it's easy to see why some people might be concerned with the vaccines against these viruses also causing autoimmune diseases in individuals that are receiving the vaccines. So a lot of studies have been performed about these vaccines. One of the studies was performed by Dr. Annette Langer-Gould. This study was published in July 2014. She researched the topic of vaccines and the risk of multiple sclerosis and other central nervous system demyelinating diseases. So multiple sclerosis is a condition where the immune disease destroys the protective covering of the nerves, and these other central nervous system demyelinating diseases do the same thing. They just eat away the protective coating that's around our nerves. So Dr. Langer-Gould and her team of researchers studied the cases of 780 patients with newly diagnosed MS or other CIS or ADEM, and had received these individuals had also received the hepatitis B vaccination or the HPV vaccine. The results of her study provided evidence that there is no long-term association between vaccines and MS or other central nervous system demyelinating diseases. Another autoimmune disease that people commonly associate with being caused by vaccines is diabetes. So diabetes is a condition where the immune system mistakenly destroys the insulin producing cells in our bodies. One study that addressed this was performed by the Danish Epidemiology Science Center, and they conducted a study on all of the children born in Denmark from January 1st, 1990 through December 31st, 2000. So during this period, Denmark had a nationwide policy of vaccinating children against pertussis, measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, poliovirus, and influenza type B. So a whole bunch of vaccines all of these children were receiving. They wanted to study these kids to see if any of these kids were developing type 1 diabetes and how many of them, and see if it was a cause of the vaccines. So from these 739,694 children, the researchers concluded that the results do not support the causal relation between childhood vaccination and type 1 diabetes, which is the type of diabetes that is an autoimmune disease caused by autoimmunity. Many other studies have studied if vaccines could cause Guillain-Barré syndrome, and Guillain-Barré syndrome is a rare autoimmune disease in which the immune system attacks the nerves. One of the studies was conducted by Dr. Jeffrey C. Kwong, and it was published in 2013. He addressed the risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome being caused by seasonal influenza vaccination and the influenza healthcare encounters. So this study found through data analysis that the attributable risks were 1.3 for Guillain-Barré syndrome administrations per million vaccinations, compared with 17.2 Guillain-Barré syndrome admissions per million influenza-coded healthcare encounters. So simply put, this study proved that those who received the vaccine were at a heightened risk of 1 per million people getting this Guillain-Barré syndrome. But those who weren't vaccinated with this vaccine and contracted influenza naturally were at an even heightened risk at 17 per million people for contracting Guillain-Barré syndrome. So none of these other vaccines have caused any autoimmunity in its recipients. So begs us to wonder if COVID-19 vaccine could also, would it cause any of these autoimmune diseases if these other vaccines hadn't caused them? So
I hope.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I hope not.
Yeah.
We're all gonna get that vaccine.
So in the contrary, like the COVID vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, so it's kind of different from these other vaccines. Still a vaccine nonetheless, but mRNA vaccines are actually being introduced into the, are being researched right now to actually cure autoimmune diseases. So one of these researches is being done by Christina Krink and her team of researchers. They injected this particular mRNA vaccine that they had developed into mice with MS or multiple sclerosis. And the study concluded that the vaccine proved to suppress MS in the mice. So although the effects of COVID-19 are being continually studied, we don't know everything about them, but based off of the reasonable information that we have, it's pretty clear.
Yeah. So seems
cool.
that data you shows that, instead of worrying about that, our chances of autoimmunity actually lower when we get those vaccinations.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. I guess I'll take the reins. So I get the opportunity to discuss kind of a hot topic currently. It seems like there's all the buzz about the effect the vaccine might have on reproductive health with pregnant or want to get pregnant. And I think it's important to kind of start that discussion off with understanding the side effects of the COVID-19 virus on reproduction itself. And so starting with like the male, the big, I think, or jumping to a conclusion that's been happening is that the testes have a significant concentration of ACE2 receptors, which are known as part of the process of transmission or infection with the COVID-19 virus, as well as the what's called a Leydig and Sertoli cells, which Sertoli cells are directly connected to spermatogenesis, and Leydig cells produce testosterone in the testes, which helps initiate that spermatogenesis. So the implication there that people have been jumping to is that the virus could invade the testes. However, in all the studies that I was able to find and research, there was no autopsies done of people who had passed away that had COVID or current patients that had COVID, that there was any virus located in the testes. They kind of debunked that. Yeah. So that was the conclusion of those results for sure. So we're good to go there. But there still are some significant side effects from the virus. Most of them are affecting sperm count and sperm motility, with results of vascular congestion, hypoxic injury, orchitis, which is like swelling of the testes, damage to seminiferous tubules, reduced number of these cells, the Leydig and Sertoli cells, and then of course fever, which is a known kind of sperm count minimizer, which is caused by that cytokine storm that's kind of famous for COVID-19, the coronavirus. So the symptoms can be maintained anywhere from 25 days up to 90 days after infection. So there's some notable things there, as well as it's been identified that semen can carry the virus. Luckily, no studies have shown that the virus can be sexually transmitted. So that's also something that's nice, that you don't have to worry about. It's still just that respiratory droplet transmission. For the female, there's also an abundance of ACE2 receptors in the ovaries and placenta. So the same kind of fears and speculation were that there was a high potential for the infection in the female reproductive system, but also there weren't any studies that I could find that found any viruses identified in the ovarian tissue. There were some in the placenta, but the studies did state that they believe that may have been from contamination upon cesarean section, not from them actually being infected in the placenta.
But Ryan, I have a question then.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what you're saying is most of the concerns revolve around this ACE2 receptor. It's kind of like the doorway into the cell that COVID's using.
Yeah.
So I'm correct when I'm asking that, like, it's mostly revolving around this ACE2 receptor that's found throughout like different parts of the body?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's that ACE receptor, which they because that's where we see it in the lungs and the respiratory tract.
Yeah.
And since those same receptor is in the testes and the ovaries, they feared, oh, this is where those fears of infertility and reproductive health issues came from. But from
Okay.
out there, they haven't found any of the virus located with those tissues where the ACE2 receptors are.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving along, there's some major side effects for women with the COVID virus. And there's a long list, things of maternal vascular malperfusion. There's even evidence of vertical transmission from the mother to the fetus. And then respiratory illness and hypoxia can result in numerous medical issues for someone who is pregnant. In the studies I was able to look up, nearly 50% of all the women that were followed and tracked that had COVID-19 that were pregnant, 50% of them delivered preterm. And so there was large numbers that were tracked, but they didn't specify like how preterm. The preterm definition is kind of pre-38 weeks delivery. So I'm assuming preterm can anywhere be between 22 weeks to 38 weeks. So it's kind of in that area. And then it can lead to hypertensive preeclampsia disorder, premature membranes, and then they've also found the presence of the virus in breast milk and placenta. So it's kind of a scary thing to understand, like what the virus can do to someone who's pregnant or wanting to get pregnant. So how does the vaccine tie into all this, and what are the side effects to that? Well, first of all, the vaccine obviously is trying to prevent these things that are happening. And so the tricky question is to answer is, well, first, the ethics of testing pregnant women with these things with the vaccine. There's a big ethics question going around on whether or not they should be involved in these studies. I guess kind of a catch-22 or a lucky side of it is some of these people who are participating in studies got pregnant after it or were unknowingly pregnant at the time. And so we do have some results, not many, because of this ethics question that's going around. But with what the information we have and the studies based upon kind of like what Christopher was talking about, that mRNA vaccine, it's kind of a unanimous decision from the major entities like the CDC, the ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, that the vaccine is the best defense against the COVID-19 virus. So thus far, from all the studies that I've been able to research and look at, the only side effects that are notable are fever. It is known that serious fever in the first trimester of pregnancy can have some pretty adverse effects on child development. Numbers that we see, at least from the Pfizer vaccine, I was only able to find their numbers regarding fever is that only up to, or 3% of people for the first dose get a fever, and then up to 15.8% on the second dose. And so obviously there's some risk factor there for those who are pregnant. If they're in their first trimester, they may need to consider that option. And then for males, if they have that fever, like I said, it can lower that sperm count, which can cause, difficulty getting pregnant in that manner. So looking at that, it is worth mentioning that some of this, I guess, distraction or stress from individuals who are worried about this did stem from the WHO, the World Health Organization, which early on in the virus and the pandemic and everything going on, they did make a statement saying that those who are pregnant, wish to be pregnant, or are lactating should not get the vaccine. But it is notable to understand that this was mentioned or proclaimed before toxicology reports were out, before the studies that I've researched were presented. And since then, the World Health Organization has taken that statement off their website. You can't find it anymore. And so you have statements from these other entities, the CDC, the ACOG, the SMFM, which is the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, stating that women that are pregnant or want to get pregnant should not wait to get the vaccine, that they should get it to help their chances. But I think, go ahead.
In that statement that the WHO posted, I assume that was just out of an abundance of caution before they had a lot of information there. Okay, just better safe than sorry. Pregnant people don't get the vaccine until we know more about it, right?
I agree. I wasn't able to find many evidence supporting or any statement made about the post that they had. But okay. I from maybe some personal interpretation, if I can, that maybe the World Health Organization is kind of covering the world, and there's so many different environments and circumstances that they need to be as safe as possible. They're the safety net. Whereas these other entities, the CDC, the ACOG, the SMFM, are here in Northern America, and they have kind of confined studies to these areas, and so they made statements about this environment, and I think that's why there may be some differing statements, but I think ultimately in the end, regardless of your standpoint, if you are pregnant, want to get pregnant, have those issues, the number one thing to do is to discuss it with a medical professional, whether that's your OBGYN, your family doctor. Obviously there's other circumstances involved when deciding those kinds of decisions, and it needs to be made with a medical professional, someone who understands your health, your environment, and your risks. So
Ooh,
awesome
stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff.
Yeah, I like what Ryan said at the end, ultimately, and he was talking about people who are pregnant or want to become pregnant, but yeah, ultimately, we're not doctors. So, before you get the vaccine, you should do your own research and you should talk to a medical professional.
Sure.
And don't rely on an undergraduate's analysis of it. Yeah, a little disclaimer, I guess. But, a lot of people do have concerns about the long-term effects of the active ingredients of the vaccine. So I'm talking about the mRNA specifically. That's my main focus, is the active ingredient, the mRNA, because that's the thing that's new to us. It's unique. And we've heard about gene editing and the reproductive health and autoimmunity. And, a lot of those concerns usually lead to the question of what's in this vaccine that could cause this? What's the new ingredient? Okay. Vaccines, it's liquid. There's some water in it. The water's not causing it. They look at the active ingredient. And, for all of the skeptics out there, the main culprit is that mRNA that Pfizer and Moderna are using. And who's ever heard of an mRNA vaccine? It does sound an awful lot like, my genetics are being changed. Someone's going to inject, some genetic code into me. Okay, that's kind of crazy. But seriously though, this mRNA, it is genetic material. No one's going to deny that. But the thing about it is that it's the wrong type of genetic material if we want it to stay in our bodies for a long time. And the reason that the mRNA doesn't stay in our body for a long time is because it goes towards the cytoplasm. Like its target is the cytoplasm. That's where our ribosomes are. So that's where like the factories are pumping out these proteins. So this mRNA, it's going to be going to that cytoplasm, and it just wants to make that protein. And then after it makes that protein, our cell is just going to recycle that mRNA. It's very efficient that way. But let's say, for argument's sake that, this mRNA avoids being broken down by the cell. So it finds some dark alley where it can hide from the cops and stuff. At that point, there's two more things that the mRNA can't avoid. And the first is that the mRNA is extremely unstable. So it's not going to hold out until, the conditions are right for it. It breaks down relatively fast, in a matter of minutes. Which is why, like the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, they need to be, frozen at a really cold temperature during transport and during storage. They can't just be put in the refrigerator. They have to be like completely frozen so that it doesn't break down. The second thing that inhibits the mRNA from lasting very long is that our cells don't replicate mRNA when the cell is dividing. I mean, it's kind of like an IKEA dresser. And I don't know if you guys have ever put together like an IKEA dresser or some piece of furniture from there. I mean, they give you the instructions and, the materials to put together the furniture. But what they don't give you is they don't give you, your roommate who's going to read you the instructions. That's kind of what the mRNA is like. It's like our roommate or your spouse who's like reading the instructions to you. IKEA doesn't provide that. And so our body, it's going to take the plans for that dresser, and it's going to take the materials, which is the building blocks for the protein. And then it's going to make messages, which is that messenger RNA, to pass that message along on how to put the pieces together. But one thing that's interesting about this vaccine is it's not the entire, genome of the COVID virus. So we're not Jacob mentioned the gene editing before. It's not like they're giving us a shot that has a bunch of genetic material telling us, okay, this is how you make the complete virus. It's all it is really the genetic information to make, one part of the virus, that spike protein. So it's pretty much like just giving you the instructions to make the drawer for that dresser. You're not getting the instructions for the full dresser. You're not going to have a working piece of furniture. Let's see. So our body gets that vaccine and it has the instructions to make the drawer, and it starts pumping out some drawers from the factory and stuff. And our body's like, hey, like, what the heck is this? This isn't mine. Like, I don't need a drawer. I don't have the rest of the dresser. I don't need the drawer. And so it starts, posting pictures on Instagram and Twitter telling people, hey, watch out for this. Watch out for these drawers. Like, these aren't good drawers. They're just taking up our time and our resources. We don't need these. And so that when our body comes in contact with that, it knows how to fight it. So that's pretty much like the three major things about the mRNA vaccine is that one, it's not going into it's not going to last very long. It's not going into the part of our cell where it could last very long. And it's going to be broken down. It's just not a recipe to last in our cells. Another concern, though, is that we'll have a continued immune response to the vaccine. I mean, the immune response to the virus can be pretty intense. I mean, some people have it worse or better than others. And some people have, responses that last a long time. So it makes sense that people would be concerned that they'd have, long-term lasting effects to the vaccine as well. But everything that I've read from, stuff from the Mayo Clinic, from the CDC, from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, they all pretty much say the same thing, and that there's no reported long-term side effects to the vaccine. And of course, there is that catch in there. It says there's no reported long-term side effects. So there could still be some long-term side effects that haven't been reported, or long-term side effects that just haven't come around yet. there are short-term side effects. There's the headache, the fever, the chills that people mention after they get the vaccine. But those are all considered acute and short-term sort of side effects.
Hey, Colton, I just had a quick question too. In your studies, did you see how long we could see like potential side effects? Are we talking like years or decades?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most of what I read, or most of what I could find, I should say, it sounds like if there was a long-term side effect from the vaccine, just from the sheer number of people that have had the vaccine so far in the trials and in the actual administration of the vaccine after trials, if there was any long-term side effects, we most likely would have seen it within 6 months of getting the vaccine, of using the vaccine in people. So the 40,000+ people who've had the vaccine, we most likely would have seen, some percentage of them developing, something long-term, like, okay, maybe, long-term headaches, which has been reported with the actual virus, or maybe, just long-term aches and chills, stuff like that. So that's what it would have been. We would have noticed it most likely within about 6 months.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. And so, I mean, because this vaccine has been trialed, for just shy of a year, crossing our fingers, hopefully we would have seen the long-term side effects before now.
Just to also note, a great long-term side effect is you gain immunity to COVID-19.
That is true. Yeah. I guess, that is a long-term side effect, is that you have immunity to the virus. But I'll take that.
Isn't there some opportunity or way you can like track those things? Something called like VAERS.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, Ryan. So VAERS, VAERS, that's the CDC's like vaccine reporting site for if you have an adverse effect from the vaccine. And I think that's what it stands for. It's like Vaccine Adverse Effect Reporting System. But you can go on there and you type, okay, like you click, yes, I accept the information, all the disclaimer stuff. And you can look up specific vaccines from specific companies. And I looked into the Pfizer one specifically because that's that represents, the mRNA vaccines. The Pfizer and Moderna, their vaccines are very similar and pretty much the same. And on that list of all the side effects, I was scrolling through it, and there are actually a ton of side effects that have been reported. But the thing to notice is that for almost all of the side effects, it's usually just someone who has, gone to the doctor's office or the hospital with some condition, and they're like, hey, but I was in this trial and I had this vaccine, and they're like, okay, well, we'll list it down just in case other people have that as well. So for example, like, let's say Ryan, you get the vaccine, okay, and then you go to the doctor because you're having like massive stomach pain, okay. Come to find out you have, some E. coli food infection or foodborne illness, okay. They're still going to report that since you were part of this trial study with the vaccine. And so on that list, it'll have pretty much everything that's been reported in that 40,000+ people that had the vaccine and stuff. And so there's things like, okay, someone had, severe infection from I think it was a Clostridium bacteria. And so there was like maybe 10 people out of however many people received the vaccine. There was 22,000+ people who had that vaccine, and only 10 people reported that sort of infection. So it's a super low amount of people who actually got that illness. So I guess the point I'm getting to is that with all of those side effects, almost all of them are very minuscule, and they happen at like pretty much the same rate as people would normally get those other side effects. I don't know if that made sense, Ryan.
Yeah, no, that totally made sense.
But yeah, that website you mentioned, that VAERS website, that is a great resource. Like if anyone is concerned about side effects that have been reported, that's a great place to look at side effects of the vaccine. And you can see on there the percentage of how frequent it is. The most common one is headache, and that's an acute headache, short-term headache, and that was sitting around 22% of people who got the vaccine had that. But yeah, other than that, that's pretty much all I had. The side effects to the actual ingredient pretty much revolve around short-term stuff, and there's really not a big chance of any long-term side effects occurring.
Perfect. Awesome. That was great. Really, really informative about all those different ones. I'll jump into my topic. My topic's about the different potential long-term effects that could happen from any of the inactive ingredients, meaning not the main ingredient, the ingredients other than like the mRNA or the adenovirus of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so first I just wanted to cover what kind of inactive ingredients are used in vaccines in general. In most common ones, because we have a lot of different variety of vaccines out there. So one of the main ingredient types that we'll have in there are preservatives, and these can take on the form of different metals or different sugars or salts. These preservatives are there to ensure that the vaccine stays viable after its production, so that way it doesn't degrade or have a worse or lesser effect after time or storage. And so preservatives are a very necessary ingredient to have in vaccines, because you're going to be shipping these around to different locations where they get to different places where people will get vaccinated. We also have what's called stabilizers, similar to preservatives. Instead of just preserving the actual thing, the stabilizers work on a more molecular level to keep the specific molecules that give you immunity intact. To be more specific about the different vaccine types, with the mRNA vaccines, we have lipids. So lipids meaning like fats and oils. This is one thing that's very important for the mRNA vaccine, because the lipids aid in getting the mRNA into your actual cells when you're injected with it. Because if you don't get the blueprint that we've been talking about into your actual cells, it's not going to be able to give you an immune response, because it won't be able to make those proteins, those spike proteins. The Pfizer particularly has a bunch of different lipids in there. It's got these different salts as well. Those ones specifically are to help balance acidity in your body. And I was thinking why we would need to balance acidity in your body at the injection site. And I was kind of thinking, okay, mRNA is more, as Colton was talking about, unstable. And so when we have this instability, it's easily degraded, we're going to need to balance pH in that injection site so we don't degrade the mRNA before it can get into our cells. And so there's also sugars added to it. This is also to aid in keeping the mRNA intact. It's mainly for stability, and also for preservation too. Similarly, the Moderna vaccine, it has lipids in it as well, but it has some other different stabilizers and preservatives in there. Instead of just salts and sugars, it also has acetic acid and some acid stabilizers in there. And I don't know the exact biochemistry that's going on here, but the purposes of this is also to ensure stability during transportation and during injection, to make sure that that mRNA stays intact, that you're going to be making those proper proteins to gain that proper immunity, so that way you will obviously be immune to getting COVID-19. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, this one's a little bit different because, it's not the mRNA vaccine like Pfizer and Moderna. And so the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has acids, salts, sugars, and actually a little bit of ethanol in it. And so these actually, as stated previously with the other two, these are all just for stability with the actual main ingredient, the adenovirus in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so these chemicals are simply to just keep that adenovirus in its proper shape and form, so that way you will have that proper immunity. The concerns about any of these ingredients causing any different side effects, either short-term or long-lasting, there are two different lipids actually that to note that have been known to cause some adverse reactions. For short-term reactions, uh, anaphylactic shock is one of them. And so this is caused by this lipid called PEP, I believe it is called. Yeah, it is. It's called PEP. PEG, not my. Yeah, PEG is the lipid. And so PEG is a lipid that is in the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. And so this is one of those lipids that aids in the transportation of the mRNA. PEG, there were some studies on it that I was going through, and the cases of people having adverse reactions to it, mainly allergic reactions, are noted to be very rare. And so PEG is actually used in a variety of medications and other vaccines, but PEG specifically was noted to, with vaccines, if someone was to have an adverse reaction to PEG for the first time, this could have a predisposition to have an adverse reaction to it. Since there's so many medications out there that have PEG in them, this if you get vaccinated and you have that adverse reaction, you could have potential side effects to allergic side effects in the future to different medications that have lower amounts of PEG, so you wouldn't have had a reaction. And so that is a potential long-term effect. Again, it's very rare. So if you have an adverse reaction to that, it's recommended to obviously speak to your doctor immediately and to not get the second dose. For the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there's another lipid. It doesn't have PEG in it, but it has this lipid called polysorbate 80. And it's a lipid, yeah, again, in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And it also is known to cause the anaphylactic shock in those rare cases. And so it's also contained in a lot of medications, since it aids in dispersing the medications in the body. And this one actually had a little more worry to it. The long-term effects aren't super fully understood right now. There's still more studies being done on it, especially with the more adverse reactions coming from the large scale of vaccinations going on. But there are implicated cases of renal and liver toxicity. There wasn't much detail on the specifics about the implications with that, other than they are doing more research on it to figure out if, okay, was this actually the cause? Was there something else causing this? But these researchers are keeping their minds open, but they're implicating that it is polysorbate 80 that is the cause of this. But again, these causes are very rare, and so a lot of this is to do with just allergies. More short-term effects are the main worry for this with the inactive ingredients. Most of the long-term effects of this are non-existent because of the ingredients being used for so long in many different vaccines that we know they're safe, because there's been so many tests done with them with different vaccinations. And so that was pretty much all I had for the inactive ingredients. Are there any questions about any of that?
Yeah, I've got a question for you.
Go for it, Ryan.
So I've heard that if you like knowingly have had an allergic reaction to like the flu vaccine, I don't know if PEG is in the flu vaccine vector as well. But I've heard like if you knowingly have had an allergic reaction to that, you should consult or like opt out of
Yeah.
something you've researched.
So the study that I was actually going over with the polysorbate 80 actually mentioned that it was included in the influenza virus vaccine. And so because the Johnson Johnson vaccine is similar in that it's an adenovirus vaccine, they would have similar ingredients to maintain stability. So that would definitely be something to note if you had an adverse reaction like that to the flu vaccine. Definitely shouldn't get the Johnson Johnson vaccine because of the similarities in ingredients. Obviously, consult your doctors though, because we're just undergrad students. But uh, yeah, the is really it's just those two lipids that have been the main concern in all the inactive ingredients. The rest of them have there's been nothing noteworthy of any adverse reactions to any of the other inactive ingredients, especially because they're in such small doses to where your body would either break them down or they would be so diluted to where they wouldn't cause any issues. So
That's pretty interesting. And I
yeah,
know that when you get the vaccine, they do monitor you for
right.
for 30 minutes after, because if you're going to have an anaphylactic response to the vaccine, it would happen
Hmm.
within 30 minutes.
Right. And that you definitely don't want happening while you're driving home.
Yeah,
So, but again,
definitely.
that's very rare for those people to have those. It's just the possibility is there for people, but it is not common.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, awesome. Thanks for that information, Devin. Really,
Yeah.
really good stuff. So yeah, no, thank you everybody for your guys' stuff. And definitely I learned quite a bit about, long-term side effects that we could see and we couldn't see. So definitely was pretty good stuff. And I hope everyone that's listening can feel, I guess, a little bit more informed about what is in the virus and how that is all going to play out. And like we said, if you have questions, we are undergrads, so we don't know everything. And, we will have our annotations and we'll have that bibliography up so you guys can refer to that too as well. But yeah, other than that, it was a real pleasure being able to talk to everybody and get to hear this information. So yeah, just always keep your mind open and yeah, just keep on exploring together.
Yeah, for sure.